What's up, folks? I want to talk today about presuppositional frameworks and assumptions, biases, prejudices, and in a broader sense than we typically use these things. Usually when we talk about bias, we're talking about bigotry, which comes right along with acting in a prejudiced way. And you know, that's important. It's important to understand how our assumptions, unconscious, subconscious, and conscious, might be biased in ways that make it so that we can't see or understand where other people are coming from, or make it so that we can't see or understand other humans and human life as something that we can empathize with or even grieve, right? Like the Judith Butler talks about grievable life. You know, is the life of the person even grievable by your what she would call a matrix of intelligibility, right? The understanding sort of framework that you're using can make it so that certain people just aren't relatable. They're not even grievable. You don't even care, you know. And so the concrete instantiation of that is where you've got, you know, children in cages, and people aren't even viewing that as life that's grievable because they're so focused on their own immediate interests, desires, survival, family, drama, stuff that is just like, you know, parochial, you know, meaning limited to their own region of interest. They don't see that other life as grievable. You know, biases and prejudices come right along with presuppositional frameworks in this sense. But I want to talk about presuppositional frameworks in a broader sense, and I want to use a good example of it. I've had a very hard time explaining what I mean by that in very simple terms, even though I think it's so important that we understand what a presuppositional framework is. But so the example I like to use now is just, you know, so in the United States of America, a lot of people, because, you know, it has been, the propaganda has made it this way, a lot of people think that left versus right is the political spectrum, and that left is big government and right is small government. That is a framework. It's a conceptual framework. It's a very limited and limiting conceptual framework that presupposes the way we interpret reality. Okay. Now, if that's it, if you've got a one-dimensional presuppositional framework for conceptually filtering all of the data of experience into that binary, it's going to result in some really absurd and confused conversations with people. Like when I was Twitch streaming a lot, and there, you know, it happened more than once where people come in and they're like, you know, they're trying to be, they're not trolls. I don't think that people were trolling us when they did this, but they'd say something like, you know, well, yeah, but Hitler was a leftist, or Hitler was a just extreme liberal. And the reason I know that that's not just trolling is because I lived in a red state most of my life. You know, I was born in a blue state, lived in a red state most of my life. I had, in that sense, a lot of normie assumptions and presuppositional frameworks of a red state normie, which comes with that one-dimensional binary that where you're reducing everything into, well, if it's big government, it's left. If it's small government, it's right. You know, and the almost anybody who's spent much time on political internet, the political side of the internet, is quickly introduced to the added dimension of up versus down, authoritarian versus, you know, which is like control, and authority being prioritized at the top. The bottom is anarchy, or you know, not, you know, the antithesis to authoritarianism. You know, where it's you know, you've got different left and right versions of that. So if you use up and down, authority versus anarchy, as the vertical axis, and then you've got left versus right economics for the political economic axis, then it frees up a bunch of new space for being able to filter and understand the data of reality. So we've expanded through adding an entire new dimension, a very limited and limiting presuppositional framework. Now, there's other ways that we can do this, though. Okay, there are other ways of adding dimensions to any presuppositional framework, but I only really wanted to use that one as one example. So when you think of the political compass, up, down, left, right, and it should be easy because anybody who's tuning into these videos probably been introduced to that. That is a concrete example of how limited and limiting presuppositional frameworks can be expanded, how we can add entire dimensions to them that will then free us up. It will free us up to be able to better understand history and current political movements. It'll free us up also to understand how a propaganda station, arm, hub, outlet, media conglomerate is able to provide people with these very limited and limiting terms or fields of reference. So I don't know if that was very helpful. It might have not been helpful at all. I hope that you'll let me know in the comments if it was helpful or not. I want to come back to this pretty often. It ties right in with the whole thing about reductivism, totalization, essentialism, because we all have sort of presuppositional frameworks that we operate on or under without even realizing it, and that one thing that makes total sense to you that doesn't make any sense to another person, it can boil down to the frameworks that are operating. And the frameworks that operate are going to be better appealed to with different forms of rhetoric, different forms of reasoning than others. And sometimes it's not about supplying a person with new concepts or new facts, new knowledge, or counter arguments. Sometimes what's more important is trying to understand what is the framework that they're operating under and why is that framework running up against yours and causing all the confusion. If you can get to that framework and expand it, then you can bring elucidation and understanding, enlightenment, etc. to the conversation instead of just getting bogged down in a tit-for-tat, mudslinging, spinning in circles, getting nowhere kind of conversation, which so often happens online. So if you've got any examples that you can think of different presuppositional frameworks beyond left and right, share them in the comments. If you are curious about the way I said something and would like me to elaborate on it, either in the comments or in future videos, go ahead and comment below. Also, big shout out and thank you to my patrons who are so helpful in making sure that I can have a hot cup of coffee every morning, because without it I get a headache, because I'm addicted to black coffee now. This just in. Bye.